Hi there, and a very special welcome to another conversation on the squirrels.in, where we're making sense of the day's biggest story, and I should say perhaps the year's biggest story. The Hindenburg Research Company has now decided to shut down its shop. Mitali Nikore, who's been on many of our programs over the last couple of years, where we've looked at what the Hindenburg exposure really means for India, for the Adani Group to be specific, is with us again. Good to see you, Mitali, in the new year, and welcome to the Squirrels.in again. Let
Thanks a
me
lot, Bhupendra.
let me begin by asking you, Mitali. You've been on so many of our programs where we've looked at how Hindenburg was a real pain point specifically for the House of Adanis. The multiple research reports which came out, which led to cases being filed in the Supreme Court, which led to a whole uproar in Parliament. I just want to understand from you first up, when a research agency which has been leveling all these allegations and has been bringing out all these reports, when that research company shuts down its shop, what happens to the veracity, the credibility of all the reports which have been brought out so far in public domain?
Absolutely. I mean, Bhupendra, I think today when I woke up and I read this news, it was a massive shock because for many, many months, we've been tracking how Hindenburg's, sort of hit pieces have been, coming out and have been attacking a lot of companies. And they've done this for a reason, right? They're a short selling equities research company. And at the end of the day, their entire purpose is to try to manipulate the stock markets in such a way that when they take a short position against any company, they should be able to sell the shares very fast and make a quick buck, as they say. So now, today, when the company announces suddenly that they are going to wrap up, it really brings into question the veracity and credibility of the research that they purportedly put out in the public domain and said, this is the truth. But now, how do we verify? Because they are now out of the picture.
So I remember when these research reports were coming out, what was the focus? The focus was on how the Adani entities' stocks were being hit, right? And the whole focus was on how the money of investors, which is being put in the stock markets, that money was being wiped out.
Yeah.
Does it have any implication now that the research company on its own has shut its shop? The individuals who lost their money because of these reports, because of these exposes, what happens to those individuals?
No, I mean, of course, with individuals, they are aware of the risks when they participate in the stock market. So for small investors, of course, there's obviously no recourse because they kind of accept that risk when they invest in the stock market. But for the larger investors, the equity, investors, definitely, here is a cause for going to some of the individuals who are behind this organization, behind Hindenburg, especially the founder, and really, putting legal cases and questioning that on what basis did those research papers, what basis were they put out? And today, what do you do? Where does the buck stop? Where is that liability?
No, let
Who
me
is
ask you
going
a
to take
straight
that
question, Mitali. Well,
responsibility?
let me ask you this question. When these reports came out, we all looked at the authenticity of these reports and the data
Correct.
which is being put out in public domain. Now that this research company on its own has shut its shop, all the data which was being put out, does it put a question mark on the credibility of the veracity of the data?
100%, Bhupendra. It really does because it's one way for the company to come out and say, you know what, we can't verify our data. What's the best way? Let's just shut down and run away. Then there will be no legal entity left to question and to say, oh, and even the founder can come out and say, it was actually put out by Hindenburg, not by me. The legal liability, stays with Hindenburg, and I have no way of verifying the data because it was not my personal research. So it's very easy for a founder in such a situation to come out and say it's not his personal liability and the company which held that liability no longer exists. So it's a very convenient exit strategy, to be honest.
So, how, as someone who tracks the stock markets regularly, what do you see could be the potential impact of the closure of Hindenburg as a research firm on Indian stock markets?
So at this point in time, we are not seeing much of an impact. And I actually don't think we'll see much of an impact, except maybe some improvement in Adani stocks. I mean, because Adani was a singular one company that was constantly in the news with Hindenburg doing hit pieces on Adani. So definitely we'll start to see some moderation in the Adani stocks maybe in the next day or two. But I don't expect it to have a long term impact on stock market per se, just on Adani stocks, some improvement in the valuation, because now a lot of investors would agree and would realize that the allegations that had been levied by Hindenburg on Adani may have been unfounded. Also, one very important thing, Bobindra, I'd like to point out, the US government has now taken out some allegations, and they have like a case going on against Adani. This is something which is very critical, because Hindenburg's reports were used as evidence from the US government side. What happens to the credibility of those reports and of that entire case now comes into question.
If I was to look at the brand of Gautam Adani himself, what do you think the closure of this research company means for the brand of Gautam Adani?
So I think this, puts Mr. Gautam Adani personally, and also the company, especially Adani Energy, which has come into a lot of question, even from the US government side, into a much better light than what was happening previously. Because there were a lot of aspersions that were cast on his personal character. There were a lot of aspersions cast on the company's, processes and regulatory, compliances, whether they were following rules or they were not following rules. And to be very honest, it was also casting aspersions on India's procurement readiness for large projects, because when they were talking about the fact that, oh, there's a lot of corruption in the in the renewable energy sector, there's a lot of corruption in solar panel allocations and procurement bids, etc. This kind of calls the entire country's processes into question. So definitely, with this news, with this one news, we can clearly say, there was a lack of credibility in the organization, because without a lack of credibility, to somehow say, oh, now I'm just shutting down without so much as a notice, and only saying that, oh, this is because of personal reasons, is really something which is quite surprising.
Finally, Mitali, a word from you on future precedents. If what we have seen over the last couple of years with the Hindenburg exposes and the kind of impact it had on Indian stock markets, on Indian politics, in future, does this case end up becoming a precedent of sorts for any similar, let's say, attempt which could be made on equally big Indian companies?
I think this makes it very clear that we need to have a regulatory environment when it comes to even this kind of research being released in the public domain. I mean, of course, I'm not saying that we should have any sort of sanctions, or we should have any sort of, point where we block research from coming out. I'm not talking about that. But I'm just saying that when we, give so much media coverage also to this kind of a news, then automatically it starts to impact public sentiment. It starts to impact stock markets. So I think, for SEBI particularly, and I think SEBI was also in the line of fire when, the SEBI chairwoman was also personally attacked by, Hindenburg files. It is very important that, SEBI comes out with a set of regulations around public disclosure of such reports, and looks at, okay, like, we have to look at the credibility of the data. We have to double check the credibility of the data before such reports are out in the public domain. And even when they are out in the public domain, it also becomes the responsibility of the media to talk about them in a manner which is absolutely transparent, which is talking about both sides of a story rather than one side of a story. And that is very important for investor confidence and investor education, because today India's stock market has a lot of first time investors who are coming from all over the country. So, that stability in the stock market and that belief and confidence in the stock market is very critical for our growth.
Okay. All right, Mitali, always a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Squirrels and turning the spotlight on this question. Thank you so much.
Thank you.